Hello. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing all right. And yourself? Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gwentlemen's talk show. Today, I am Dale the White Wolf, joined with Swim. We have Ruben with you, and of course, Rethaz from CD Projekt Red. First off, I just want to thank Rethaz for joining us today. I know he's been with us on the show before, but for continuing to, listen to our requests and pesters to get him to come out again. Thank you very much, Rethaz, for agreeing to be here today.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
We have a lot of announcements that have come out of Gamescom. I think that there's been rumors floating around that people are calling this Gwent 3.0, where it's just there's just so much stuff coming out where it's oh my gosh. But I'm a little curious, Rethaz, from your perspective, what's it like from a development standpoint, over the course of public beta so far?
There's things that can go better. There's things that we're really happy with. It always just depends. It's very variable, and as for reaction goes for things we're working on at the moment, it's kind of the same. There's some people that are very happy, some people that are not, and I think the same kind of thing we always go through with patch cycles is you really need to play things and experience it for yourself to kind of see what it feels like and how it is.
And speaking of that initial gut reaction, I think from people, let's just go ahead and jump into probably the most talked about topic at probably the foreseeable future. I think we'll be debating this back and forth until, we get, us as players, get a chance to actually play around with it. But golds becoming a lot more vulnerable than they currently are. So we're not talking just damage, but full interactivity from my understanding on it so far. How long has this idea kind of been floating around?
Honestly, since before we even launched the closed beta. I mean, those of you that are veterans of closed beta will remember at various times there was different types of interaction with gold cards. I mean, the introduction of Dimeritium Shackles yielded cries of it being the most powerful card in the game, and so on and so forth. So it's something we've toyed with off and on and played with in different ways. And I think it might even be the last time I was on the show. I think I talked actually about damaging golds and different solutions for that, because a lot of players think from their perspective that it's okay, but we see statistically that a lot of games just kind of come down to who has the biggest golds on the board or who draws the most golds. And honestly, it's not really as fun as it should be, and that's kind of one of the big things that we want to address with this. It also just opens up a huge amount of deck building possibilities, because now you can buff golds, you can damage them. So the interaction goes both ways. There's many things that you can do to golds in a positive manner as well as in a negative manner now.
So do you have any considerations or plans to possibly bring back this kind of immune effect, maybe as a keyword, instead of being associated with golds?
It's possible. It's kind of dangerous because if you have, let's take the example of T-Bor, and this is something that we see thrown around a lot in suggestions, is to make things like T-Bor, immune to destroy effects. So you're just going to buff T-Bor with all of the buffs that you possibly can, and then he can't be destroyed. And you can imagine then you can Fringilla him and so on and so forth, and you have a huge amount of value. So making something that really can't be destroyed in this kind of way that is interactable in other ways is kind of just going to lead us back into similar problems that we currently have. So it is possible to have something that's immune, but I think it would probably want to go both ways, so it can't be positively or negatively affected. And if we were to use that, it would probably be very special cases, and it would, that would be like that card's kind of thing. But for now, we don't have it on any of the cards at the moment that are going to be going live. So we'll see how it develops in the future.
And speaking of Dimeritium Shackles, I remember you mentioned for the veterans, or that card got released, and I was just like, oh my god, 3 of it in every deck. We need to lock these golds and just get rid of the gold effect to be able to get at them. But now with golds going back towards being a lot more vulnerable, are we looking at possibly a change to Dimeritium Shackles, or are we thinking that's staying where it's at?
I think so. Some people have already seen. I think it was shown from some of the Gamescom demos, or maybe even in the social video. Yeah, Dimerichum Shackles does some damage also.
Okay.
So, you know, it's not a completely dead card if you don't have a lock, as in if you have no viable lock target, you at least get a few points of damage. It's not a lot, but it's just something to kind of incentivize its use a bit more. And honestly, it's I think, like I said before on the show last time, or it might have been the time before, I'm not sure, but we're very much leaning towards a way of kind of using a lot of the bronze special cards more as being tutored than anything else. So that's it hasn't really been noticed that much. I know there's been some talk about it, but there's a lot of new categories in the game, and really we leverage those categories quite a bit. Some of the new cards work especially with just the new categories, and that's definitely something moving forward that we'll be doing more of. So, you know, tags become important. It's not only dwarfs that matter, it's much more than just dwarfs that matters now.
I think I remember seeing officers, soldiers coming from Nilfgaard, and definitely some other ones from other factions as well. But so speaking of those new categories, those new tags, new cards, interacting with them in some way, at least maybe from my perspective, I hadn't seen that, but could we get an example maybe of what type of interaction would go with a category like that?
It kind of depends. I mean, there's, I think, I don't know if it's been revealed, but if it hasn't, I think it's probably okay. I think it's Nilfgaardian Standard Bearer, yeah. Nilfgaardian Standard Bearer, basically, he's a card that you play on the board, and whenever you play another card, he buffs an ally by 2. Now, before people jump in and cry Unga mechanics, which honestly is one of the most insulting and derogatory terms that I've seen on our Reddit and so on, it's really not very fair to the design of this game. These abilities are manually triggered, so when you play a soldier, it actively triggers the passive effect of the Nilfgaardian Standard Bearer and allows you to select the target. So it's kind of, whenever you play a soldier, you get the ability for the Nilfgaardian Standard Bearer to reuse kind of a minor deploy effect. And that's something we're not using very heavily at the moment, but there's a couple of units that use that interaction in this update.
Well, moving on from the gold discussion a little bit, so the other major, I think we're going to be saying that at least 2 more times throughout this talk show, but one of the other major things coming out of this patch is the introduction of the Pro Ladder, going with the whole Gwent Masters announcements, which, I mean, from my perspective, I'm just like, yes, competitive Gwent, this is it. But no, so, I mean, a lot of people are really excited with the Pro MMR ladder thing. I don't believe it has an actual name that I've heard yet, where you have to play a lot of different decks in order to be able to, you know, actually move up on it. You can't just play the same deck. But I know, what are we looking at? Anybody above 4,200 at the end of the season, also rank 20 and above, automatically get in, even if you drop below that 4,200. But what was really the impetus on bringing out this Pro Ladder in addition to the rest of the Gwent Masters announcements? What was the idea to move this away from just the standard ranked ladder that we see now?
I think it's as a company, we definitely want esports to be an important thing, and it's honestly more community driven than anything else. And even for you guys, for example, have set up your own tournaments and have a pretty big one going at the moment. There's been some other ones from Good Game and various other places as well. So we want to support competitive play, and this kind of is part of an overarching strategy to link in with major competitions with pretty big prize pools as well. So it's kind of just driving the players at the top of the game to kind of have their own separated division. And there's some there'll be some comments about, oh, why can't that just be at the top of the ladder, or why can't the pro ladder systems apply to the rest of the ladder? And a big reason for that is because the game is free to play. If your MMR was a breakdown of your various factions, it means as a player you're required to purchase enough cards or spend enough time to earn enough cards to be able to play 4 factions, which for the casual player isn't really very fair. And it means that those casual players would basically just be stuck at 1,500 MMR, which probably wouldn't be very fun for them. The Pro Ladder is really aimed at the much more hardcore gamers who, have either, invested in the game, or they've invested in the game with their time and have been able to, obtain enough cards and enough decks to be able to kind of compete on a higher level with more varied abilities and decks.
And I know one concern that people have brought up about this split from the regular ranked ladder is what really happens to the ranked ladder now that we're going to be seeing the top, I don't know how much percentage, but the top of everybody above 4,200 on the ranked ladder suddenly disappearing from the ranked ladder and going to this pro ladder. What becomes of the regular ranked ladder?
I don't think anything will change in reality. You can play on both, and they're independent of each other. So the way it will work is that the leaderboard and the ranked match button will have a toggle, and you can just switch it between pro and normal ranked. And I think for those kind of players, ranked will become their casual mode. So they can. And for example, I know Swim does it quite a lot, just plays very different decks and experiments on ladder. And I can imagine a lot more players will probably be doing that because the level of play should still be very high when they're at the top of the game. But it won't be really jeopardizing their ladder position on the pro ladder because they'll be in the kind of the different division.
Sorry about that. My internet chopped out there.
Yeah, it put me off for a second. The pictures just went everywhere. So
I thought he was just striking a pose. Going on with the competitive ladder, the pro ladder. So we have this introduction of the Gwent Masters series, which it's just a lot of tournaments, split between open tournaments, challenger tournaments, and of course the final Gwent Masters at the end. And we also have, I believe, we're collecting crown points in order to be able to compete towards the final Gwent Masters. Am I correct on that one?
I don't want to get into the specifics, to be honest, because it's really honestly quite technical, the rules, and I just suggest anybody that wants to kind of get into the Gwent Masters or potentially the programming really just goes and reads the website. I think it's a really comprehensive system and hopefully should be engaging and rewarding for players. But if you want to check it out, secondhand information from me that it's really quite a large system. You should really just go to the website, check it out yourself. There's a really great video that our marketing team made, which kind of shows off like how the systems work and how the different tournaments work. And if you're interested, I would strongly suggest checking that out. I'm sure someone can put a link to that in the chat if they wish at the moment.
Definitely try and get that out there.
So we've seen Rethaz a lot of these new cards from this Gamescom event. A lot of pretty interesting effects that you guys are trying out, and one in particular seems a little bit many people are saying over the top, which is Zarthesius. What would you say? How would you say you feel about that? Because you're obviously putting this effect in the game. Does it create some awkward complications, or are people just overreacting?
I personally think people are overreacting. There have been cards that have done that in the game previously. By mistake, so that's not a great thing, but and they didn't really break the game. I think that this card, it's literally this card's utility. You're playing, a 10-point card, and you get the ability to see that. You also get the ability to put it at the bottom of the deck, and we really like the idea of this card, and it just doesn't see play. And we want to make it more powerful, and the way that we make it more powerful without just, him being like a 15 or something, because then that's just silly. He'd be better than a lot of other cards in many ways. We want to kind of keep the ability and keep the spirit of it, and it's something very different that no other card can do in the game at the moment. So this patch, we've really been trying to push a lot of uniqueness, and therefore, some of you have been seeing some new units come. Well, not new units. So some units that have had some critique about their design. Quite a few of them have been changed. Yeah, I hate that term. It's really a silly term, and people like to use it to win their argument. There's some similarities between some of those cards, and part of that's deliberate, but also, you can just apply it to anything. It's like, this card's a 5 and does 3 damage, and this card's a 6 and does 4 damage. Oh, they're the same, but when you have hundreds and hundreds of cards in the game, you need to provide different variants of damage, buffs, and various other mechanics as well. It's really not so straightforward. And, also there's learning curve in the game when it comes to people knowing it. And honestly, a lot of people don't notice that because they are very into the game and they're very experienced with it. But probably the biggest challenge as a game that we have is getting new players and getting them into the game. Once we have this thing where once people are into the game, they seem to be super addicted to it and really into it. And they play thousands of games in ranked. And there's quite a large hurdle in learning Gwent, and it's because it's a very complex game in reality.
Well, I mean, sometimes you just throw the cards out there. That's all you got to do.
If only it were that simple, Dale.
Sometimes it is.
Going back to the pro ladder thingy, I have a small question about that. The rewards for the top players there are crown points, specifically for the top 200, and there's a specific amount. Will there be any other, rewards like skins or borders or something that won't be achievable by the normal people, or is that solely do you want to keep that solely for people who want to get in the competitive scene, and that's its only function? All the rest is you can get it by in the normal ladder and stuff like that.
As far as I'm aware, I believe that the tournament is really focused on the prize pools of the tournament. And, as I think some people are aware from the website, there's $25,000 tournaments, $100,000, and I believe the World Masters is $250,000 tournaments. So I think that the primary focus is on the monetary prizes. And at this time, I'm not aware of there being other prizes. I think that for the moment, those are just kind of confirmed for the normal ranked ladder, and that also gives an incentive for the more pro players to still continue to play the normal ranked ladder as well in between, because there's some quite prestigious rewards. And I think something that we haven't actually been happy with how the borders look for the we've been trying to find kind of our right style for them, the way they work in the UI and stuff. And if you look at the progression from the closed beta borders to the public beta season 1 borders, there's already an improvement, and the borders for closed beta season 2 are absolutely fantastic. I'm super happy with how they look. One of our artists called Alex did just an awesome job on them. And I think people will be really happy with them. We'll also be changing the distribution in the next season a little bit to make it so a few more players get kind of the higher tiers than the lower tiers. So that I think some people will be quite receptive to. And I think, to be honest, we'll go back and probably rework the closed beta borders because we're not really happy with the visual quality of them.
Sounds good.
All right, well, the other major thing out of Gamescom is this announcement of the single-player campaign Thronebreaker, which, I mean, they've already said 10 to 15 hours, depending on if you want to try and go out through all the side quests. Probably take, I mean, I like trying to do everything, so I'm expecting to spend about 20, 25 hours on the thing. But, it's not just for Gwent fans, because it is actually CD Projekt Red coming out with a new Witcher story. So it's for all Witcher's fans. Something that we haven't seen before. And, what for you were the most exciting parts of working on trying to get the single player campaign up to its current, up to where it will be?
I think there's many things about the single player that are really fun, actually. Our art team, there's several key people that work on the single player and making it look really cool. And the world that we've been building, the different maps. I mean, I think it's 99% certain it's been confirmed before that there's multiple parts, so there's different maps, and each map kind of has its own setting and own feel, and they're really quite different. There's some kind of there's going to be some Easter eggs and some nice little hidden things in there, and some foretelling of maybe some future things that people will be able to find. So when people get to play it, you'll have to keep an eye out for those and try and discover those, like the penguin on the iceberg in the Clan on Crate Pirate Captain's card. So there's some nice little things like that. But I think actually the most fun thing is that we don't have to worry about multiplayer balance, which is great, and it means that we can do whatever we want with single player battles. You can have a crazy scenario where you're fighting against one enemy who has a huge amount of power, rather than kind of a standardized, more standardized card game where it's back and forth. There's really a lot of special and unique things that will be happening. I don't really want to spoil any of those at the moment, so won't go into any details, but the design team are working very hard on making it cool and fun. And I want to give a special shout out to one of the designers who's been working really hard on it, called Sebastian. He's been doing a just fantastic job, and he's really making the level design and the single player be fantastic.
I mean, you can almost go back to Witcher 3 Gwent almost, because it's single player. You don't have to keep in mind the multiplayer aspect, so you can make that that part. In the end, in the Witcher 3, you were just you had a deck, you were OP. You had to be really unlucky to lose a fight, and in a way that was a really good feeling. And I guess in multiplayer you can remake that feeling again and remake that fire why people were playing Gwent in the Witcher 3 again. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm going to be very, very scared if my opponent suddenly comes out with some triple bronze decoys and triple bronze scorches.
There's actually we actually have we will have difficulty levels as well within the single player. So for those people that just kind of want to play the story, they can just really experience Gwent at a much easier level. And then obviously for those veterans and such, they can turn up the difficulty to play the game kind of as we'd intended it. I mean, you can imagine they'll probably be named in a similar manner. I thought you didn't play The Witcher 3.
No, I played a few hours of it on stream.
No, I know.
Well, again, without going into too much detail about the card game battles, I'm just thinking, so it is still Gwent being played in the single-player campaign, so we are still going to have to be building decks to combat our AI opponents. Is this something that we're really going to have to be each battle looking through our card collection and figuring out what the best cards to bring against that opponent are, or is this something that maybe we can find a generally good Gwent deck and just try and steamroll through all of them?
It kind of depends. Again, like based on difficulty level, I think the lowest difficulty levels you kind of just be able to play as you want, and that's the intention. At the higher difficulty levels, you'll need to be a lot more careful and kind of more strategic about how things go. And some of the battles, I think we've talked about it a little bit. We have kind of these puzzle battles that you get a predefined deck in, and you have to kind of solve the solution. So the difficulty is very much up to something that we ourselves define. So the puzzles can be really quite challenging and quite difficult, and those are kind of something we're really actually very happy with. I think people will really like them.
So in terms of what the direction you're pushing the game in, I mean, you said yourself you're creating all of these new tags, like tribal tags, not just for units, but for spells as well. And this is going to push a lot of new archetypes. And this kind of like archetype heavy push is going to be a little bit reminiscent to some people of Yu-Gi-Oh, who had a similar thing going on. And a common complaint there was that the decks kind of, at a certain point, end up building themselves. Are you at all concerned that something like that will maybe end up happening, or do you think archetypes are just going to be a very good thing for the game?
I mean, it's very possible that will end up happening more, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. I think one other thing that a lot of people don't understand about Gwent is that it's very different to the majority of card games, and I know you guys understand this, and some of the listeners probably definitely do. But the kind of standardized card game format that was, maybe there's some precursor to Magic I'm not aware of, but I'll say that it's kind of standardized by Magic the Gathering, and then a lot of card games kind of focus around this mana system where per turn you gain more mana, you gain more cards, and Gwent is really something very, very different to that, and that's why there's some complaints that we're constantly evolving the game and really changing a lot of things. And the reason for that is because we're really in very uncharted territory with this game, and some things work and some things don't. And if we see something's not working, we need to try and change it, because when we do the full release of the game, we don't want to be doing those things anymore. We want to have something really solid and set, and get on to kind of this normal cadence of doing major updates of card expansions and so on and so forth. I mean, there's been some critique of the amount of cards we're releasing, and this month we're releasing 30 cards, and between now and Christmas there's a pretty constant stream of cards. It's not huge, but it's a constant stream. And then next year, I can't give any numbers, but we really plan to be releasing a lot more cards. So I mean, significantly more cards next year. And Pavel talked about there being a new faction at some point after the single player. I can't give any dates for that, but that's just an example of that. And long. In fact, in another interview, he said factions. But, that's a bit far off to be, for us to be talking about and thinking about at the moment. But so if you can imagine, if we're putting a new faction in the game, we really want to have a lot more cards also.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite part of the IGN interview that I saw. Was the interviewer asked, are we having like name sets comes out? He's like, no, just cards, man. Just we're having cards, so don't worry about it. But pushing out cards, and something that you don't see a lot of other game companies doing right now is trying to just build up and get to the point where it's like, no, like we don't need to worry about naming all of this and pushing it all out at once. If we have cards available, we'll put cards out. And that's something that, for me, is extremely exciting, because seeing how every single time we get new cards, it always is a drastic shift in how the meta develops and how the game is played. And it's really trying to figure out, go back to puzzles. It's trying to figure out what fits well with other things, so it'll be extremely fun playing with all these new cards, and something I'm very much looking forward to. And real quick, speaking about new cards, it's my last thing that I had about the single player campaign, just a clarification if at all possible. So I know it's been mentioned that if you purchase the single player campaign, this is going to be with real money. I don't believe it's with ore or dust or any end-game currency. It's actual cash money. You get the 20 cards from the single player immediately unlocked, and you're able to play them in multiplayer. And if you play through the campaign, then you're able to unlock the premium versions of these cards for use in multiplayer again. Are those cards locked exclusively to anybody who has purchased the campaign, or are you able to get those cards if you are a free-to-play player?
Given the amount of questions that's come up about that on different forums and social media and stuff, I imagine our PR department will be issuing a statement about that pretty soon. So I can't give any details about that at the time. But, as a company, generally, we try to be very fair. And I think that we have a track record that proves that. So, I'd wait for any official PR announcement before, making martyrous statements. I see a lot of people, saying, "Oh, I won't play this game ever again if they don't allow me to get this," and so on and so forth. And those reactions are extreme. I think just before jumping to conclusions, just really wait for a proper PR statement on this. CD Projekt Red, as I said, it's we tried to be a very fair company, and Gwent as a game, I think, is very evident of that, as was The Witcher 3 and the expansions and DLC.
All right, well, something to look forward to, and waiting for the official announcement on that one. All right, well, let's go ahead, and I know Swim's been trying to just sneak it in occasionally, but let's just dive right into proper card talk. So we know that we're getting 30 new cards. We haven't seen all of them revealed yet. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But I guess let's just open it up, because I know I'm sure we all have questions about it. But what are like the couple of changes? Ruben, go ahead and start with you. That any questions? Like, what are the couple of changes that you're seeing so far from what's been revealed already that you'd like to discuss a little bit further?
Well, the major change, which is, which everyone is like, keeping in mind. We look upon gold cards right now as immune things, and right now they're like transitioned to normal functioning cards, right? They're not immune anymore, and that feature losing, raises a lot of questions. And there's one in the chat that they keep repeating, and it's what happens to cards like Cambi and Unseen Elder, cards like Tibor, and I'm sure there's there will be a lot of balance changes to those gold cards and to a lot of other cards, because you have Katakan who can eat other cards, and stuff like that has to change if because everything opens up like that, and it just, there's so much that needs to change, and it just boggles my mind how in such a short time you'll be able to give us a patch with actual, a balanced patch that will be with all those gold changes. This is such a huge gold change, and I like the change because, we've all been there, that we lost the game because we didn't have the 4 gold cards, right? And, the silver cards, how do you say that? The difference between a silver and a gold card was so big, and right now they closed that gap, and I really like it. And I think that's going to be really healthy for the game in the long run, and we'll see how the balance changes made it You know,
Was there actually a question in there, Ruben?
No. I mean,
it's all right. I can take a question from it. I'll take the question about like big golds and stuff, and I can clarify a few of those things. Cambi has a trigger which is the Death Wish now, so it's really very simple to trigger Cambi. So that's one change, for example. Tibor actually strengthened so that he can't be countered by Mardrum. We've changed Igni's range so that it's generally something we've been working on is raising the value of a lot of stuff in the game, which means that the thresholds for things like Igni probably need to go up too. So Tibor, for example, if you play him on an empty row, will be below Igni. But he is still vulnerable to Scorch, and there'll be some complaints about that, but that's one card in the entire game that can immediately counter him. And I think that's a pretty acceptable condition. There's ways you can bait out your opponent's Scorch. There's other, you can save Tibor till the last card to play him. And having, a few cards in the game that do that, I think the design team as well, we've tested with it, we've played with it, and we feel it's really very fine. I mean, Scorch isn't played in every deck, and also it's, like I said, you can bait it out of your opponent in other ways as well. And generally, values are really a lot higher. We've been pushing the power of many things. Like you've seen in the past that with bronze cards in general, we've been pushing them to be more, I don't know how to say it other than just more critical to the game. And that was partly to address the issue with golds being too powerful. And obviously the immunity change really addresses a huge part of that, which is great, but we don't want there to be a massive gap between golds, silvers and bronzes. We want it to be really quite small. It should be enough that you still want to take golds and silvers, but a lot of their power comes from their utility. I mean, let's look at a card like Morgvarg, for example. Morgvarg has really, a very unique ability that isn't replicated by any of the other cards in the bronze cards in Skellige, for example. And the same with, say, Madman Lugos as well. He's, really a high damage dealer, does a discard synergy and so on and so forth. So on paper, those cards are, actually in reality, not that many more points than your best bronze cards, but they give something that really has a lot of utility and synergy with other mechanics as well. So and it kind of depends on a case-by-case basis. Some of the cards that would be very vulnerable to removal have either had like a defensive Death Wish added to them, or they've had armor added to them so that they can't be removed by very low power removal. But let's say, for example, if you play Ciri and your opponent spends 2 removal cards on getting rid of her, that's acceptable. If you probably feel bad if they played Owls of Sunder and they removed her. In reality, it's a card for a card trade, which is actually very fair still. But we want people to not feel bad when their golds are destroyed or removed or whatever the case may be. So, in some cases it's a bit harder where we feel it should be. Another case of that is Wild Boar of the Sea, Priscilla, and some others as well. So, we haven't tried to make like too drastic changes to those cards, depending on what they are. And I know there's a lot of complaints about Unseen Elder. As many of you know, Consume is actually kind of the mechanic that I developed, so I'm really actually very proud of Consume. Some people hate it, but a lot of people love it as well. And Unseen Elder is performing really very fine in our testing. He's just you can't be greedy with him. If you consume 30 plus points, then expect something to happen to him. It might not, of course, because your opponent might not have that answer. But you can really keep him under the value of other things while still obtaining the value you want. If you eat 3 eggs, or you eat 2 eggs and another unit spawning Arakas, giving triggers for your Neckers and various other things as well. There's a bunch of Death Wishes in the game that have been added, such as the Rot Fiend and some other things. And it's he's really seems to be performing very well. If it turns out that we're wrong and his play rates end up being like 0.1%, then for sure we'll look at it. But I personally highly doubt that's the case. But we'll have to see.
Now, could you at all tell us more about this Rot Fiend, or is that that's?
No, that's fine. I mentioned that in a Reddit post the other day, and no one picked up on it. I was surprised that no one picked up on it, to be honest. Rot Fiend is basically he has a defensive Death Wish, and he damages a lot of other units. I don't want to get into too many specifics. It'll come out. People will see it either over the next few days or I guess when the patch actually goes live. We'll have to see. There's a dev stream coming as well, so they'll be showing a lot of details. But Rotfiend does something you imagine he might. For those of you that have played the games, he explodes and deals damage to your opponent.
It's going to be super fun to. It's probably my favorite archetype in Monsters is trying to get Death Wish working. So having more Death Wish stuff, I'm just very stoked to see that. But something I want to maybe talk a little about with the card changes is this resilient unit change, where if I'm not mistaken, what I've seen so far is that if a unit is resilient carrying over towards the next round, it's going to be reset back to its base strength if it has any green strength buffs currently on it. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I mean, I think it might have been last time I was on the show as well. We've talked about carryover before for sure, and it
definitely have.
It's been an important issue in the game for a long time, and we've toyed with various solutions and doing various things, and it's something we've been a bit reluctant to do because it might destroy some archetypes, but we've tried to address those problems in a different way. Like, for example, the dwarf decks now rely on strengthening dwarves so that you keep the base value, and I see a lot of people saying that dwarfs will be dead, and I think, again, it's just kind of this knee-jerk reaction cycle people get into. I think dwarfs will be super fine, and relying on base strength, you can get them to really quite high. You get your Mahakaman guys to like 10, 12 points with various strengthening mechanics. The whole dwarf kit has kind of mostly been changed to work with strengthening. So you can still rely on those. And then you have, I'm pretty sure Dwarven Agitators was shown before. Dwarven Agitators can kind of spawn another copy of a unit, so you can get more resilient guys on the board if you wish as well. So it's I think it will make for a much fairer game in many ways. And some people will argue that it loses depth from the game. I personally strongly disagree that throwing a bunch of buffs on a card and then just like sitting back and it carrying over to the next round adds a lot of depth to the game. I think it kind of detracts from it, and it's very alienating for certain players as well, because it very much boils down to this whole kind of point of like, if you don't have the answer, then you lose. And we're trying to move towards the game, and we've talked about it before. Again, we're moving the game more towards somewhere where deck building options should be more open. If you're pushed to take very, very specific counters and specific cards, it obviously stifles deck building. And we'll see how this patch goes. Hopefully things will go well and people will try out a lot of things. I really strongly suggest people to try things out. There's a lot of powerful tools in the game with this coming patch, a lot of units that were underplayed that should be much more viable. So we'll have to see how it goes.
It's something that I think people really, in general, will always go and be like, this is how I play the game, and this is how the game is played. And then something gets changed, like, oh, wait a second. And especially with the dwarf decks, we've seen the agitators, we've seen the pyrotechnic, I don't remember the exact name, but
pyrotechnicians.
There we go. The fact that Brewer is getting changed to any silver card plus any bronze dwarf from your deck, like we're seeing, it's a change, but I think that it's something that people need to keep in mind is that other things are changing too, and because of that, it's level playing field, figure out what's good again, and we've got plenty of time to mess around with things, and it's not just you can't just always stay in the same mindset. You always have to change. So I think it's just something useful to keep in mind.
Like I mentioned before, I think evolution is a really big thing for Gwent, and I think that's something that's going to continue in the future. I mean, we want better tech in terms. We've talked before about having, we're working on something to give a lot more consistency to the way certain things trigger, because even in this patch there will probably be some inconsistencies that we're not happy with, and it's really just technical limitations, and those we hope to be eliminated. I can't give a date on that, unfortunately, but it's something we've been working hard on for a long time, and we hope will really improve the play experience for people.
I actually have a query. If you're feeling generous regarding these leaks, I have one question as a Scoia'tael player who has not actually touched that faction in several months. There's one card that we've seen that we haven't seen an ability associated with, and that's Sage. Would you be able to say what Sage does, or is that a no-no?
Probably not. Was Sage already revealed? I don't know.
I believe we've seen a picture of it as a bronze 7.
A picture and a
was
name, yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think I can, because I actually checked with PR if I could, but unfortunately they're very, very busy at Gamescom, and I don't want to do this without their say so. So apologies for that.
Oh no! I just thought we were in leak mode. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Well, other than that, so any other major card change that you want to bring up for the discussion with you? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's gotten changed.
What?
Oh yes.
No, I'm pretty much good with it. I like all these changes across the board. I kind of want to wait and see how it turns out before jumping to any conclusions.
Yeah, that's the thing that really strikes me with this patch that's coming out, is that like it very much is reminding me of whenever we went from closed beta to public beta, in the fact that there's just so much that's gotten changed that I think that trying to take anything and sandbox it, or take our current knowledge and use that to evaluate these all these changes, is just going to cause a lot of headaches, and it's really going to be a chance to, when we get this patch and when we get a chance to sit down and actually get our hands on it, is when I think we can draw some way better conclusions. But for now, all I can do is say I'm getting a general good feeling from all of this, especially regarding. I mean, I would like to see some more Squirtle stuff for sure, but if we're in a no on leak mode, then bringing up the Nilfgaard changes specifically. I know we already discussed ours, Arthesius, but what strikes me personally about the Nilfgaard changes is that a lot of it feels still like it's Nilfgaard. It's just that a lot of stuff has gotten changed, I think, for the better. Especially the Assassin. I believe when we originally saw this card, it was a 2-strength bronze, deal the unit's base strength to its left as a spine unit. But I'm seeing now it's been changed, so it's a 1-strength bronze instead, and it's still doing the base power, but only up to 10. And that only up to 10 is something that I think there's another card that's doing something similar. Still a Nilfgaard, and I can't find it.
Only up to 10?
I don't think there's anything else that's doing.
Ambassador only buffs up to 10.
No, there's more, but anyway.
Yeah, but Treason with now pulls back a bronze spy on the enemy.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yes. Yeah, I mean, limitations is something that allows us to obviously control the cards from getting out of control. So it's a good tool.
That's actually what we wanted to bring up. Is this something that we should be expecting more of, not only for this batch of cards, but for future cards, where we'll have these cards that are have an effect that could possibly scale, but then they have this cap, and it's a points cap based on how many points they can, just a straight, if we saw Gigni, but instead of just scorching, it would instead do X amount of damage if that damage was available to be done.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you for a moment. Could you repeat that?
Sure, not a problem. So is this something like this limitation on a hard points cap? Is this something that we should be expecting more from this batch of cards and for future batch of cards? And that, take for instance a card that deals up to 20 damage as long as that damage is available. That number specifically, is that something that we should be looking for as the hard limiter, as opposed to other types of constraints on these cards? Are we going to see more of the points being the actual limiter?
Yeah, I think so in some cases, but I wouldn't want to do it too often, or we'd be accused of doing the Unga points thing. So have to be careful with that.
Yeah, that's a little unfortunate. Speaking of Nilfgaard, though, I'm curious, Rethaz, and this is something I've kind of heard conflicting hearsay about, but what is your guys' position on how you feel about Mill as an archetype? Because Mill, it's very interesting that you're giving basically the potential for a very alternate win condition, but at the same time, it must be a nightmare to balance, right?
I think Mill is only really an issue at the high end of the game, and that's one major point. Mill, at least from what we see in terms of data, is not something that's really played by lower level players and mid-range players at all. It's really, I think, the the complexity of mill, and sure, people can say you just throw cards down and draw their cards. I think it's a lot more intricate and complicated than that to really be, making an effective mill deck and be an effective mill player. So I think it kind of just takes care of itself to some degree, as long as the cards aren't too good, and we're trying to make sure that they aren't too good. It's there's also other ways to combat it at the high level. And we've seen at the higher level of play that some people have started putting more than 25 cards in their decks to combat this, and with the amount of tools that there are in decks to thin and to draw various other cards or summon other cards. I think there's different ways that you can play with it, around it, counter it, and I think it's great. It's a very unique archetype from Nilfgaard, and sure, there's some minor ways you could maybe do it in other factions, but it's primarily a Nilfgaard thing, I think, and would probably like it to stay that way.
So you plan on adding more tools, basically, for this archetype to be able to, I guess, I mean, right now it's an archetype that is only supported by a handful of cards, right? And part of them, like half of them, aren't even really Nilfgaard cards, right? You've got Avalak, and then ways to be able to reuse him. So you plan on trying to create a more fleshed out archetype with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's, like I said, it's something unique, and I think, like we've talked about before, more unique archetypes and playstyles is definitely something that the game wants and needs. So, yeah, we want to try and support it, but we don't want it to we don't want it to be too frustrating for players. So therefore, the unit balance is very important. I mean, if you had a card that was like 8 power and draw a card for both players that was a bronze card, it would probably be far too good, and therefore we won't be doing that.
And something that, maybe just me just thinking out loud a bit, but you mentioned one of the benefits of the single player campaign was that you're able to design cards in such a way that it's not meant for multiplayer, and that we've had issues in the past where certain cards, mill specifically, were prevalent more at the higher ranks of the ladder and not really prevalent throughout the ladder. And now that the higher ranks of the ladder are going to this new pro ladder, will we ever possibly see cards specifically for that pro ladder where they have a certain effect only on if you're playing on that ladder, and a different effect if you're playing in casual or ranked?
I think that's highly unlikely. In fact, I think we can say that we won't ever do that, to be honest.
That's what
I have a question now. I'm not sure if you're able to talk about this in any capacity whatsoever, but I'm curious just how your general feeling on Gwent potentially having some kind of arena or draft mode in the future, because it's my personal opinion that it would be very hard to incorporate a draft mode into Gwent, and it would have to look very, very different if you did do it from how it looks in Hearthstone, for example. Is this something that you've thought about?
We've confirmed before that we will have a second game mode in the future.
Oh, okay.
And that it's likely to be some form of draft. I can't get into specifics of how that will work, but we want this game mode to really highlight the fact that there are many different cards in the game, and that players have a lot of choice. Obviously, for those free-to-play players that might not have access to all the cards, this game mode allows you to try out and see those cards in action for yourself. So I think it's something. Well, it's definitely something that we have actively been working on, and we know that some of our players are a bit, afraid of PvP as well. So it's very likely that we would also have a single player variant of the same kind of mechanics as well.
Oh.
So you'd be able to play versus the AI or versus players if you wish as well.
That's cool.
And go ahead.
I have a question. So I noticed an interesting change to to some of the leaders, and leaders, of course, are one of the most vital parts of your deck because they're very, very unique. And basically, the one specific one I'm talking about here is Harold. He got changed with a nice tick on him, and that's something we've never seen before on a leader. They were basically always deploy abilities so far. Do you? Is this some sort of test if it will work well on it, or do you think in the future you're willing to experiment more with like effects like these, ongoing effects?
It's kind of a little bit of a test, but really, I mean, Harold's deployability is actually very good for being synergistic with Axeman. So his kind of primary role is to be an Axeman enabler, and beyond that, the passive ability is kind of just a follow-up bonus as well to keep enabling that ability. So we'll see how it goes with him. I mean, obviously he's vulnerable to being removed, but if you're playing him correctly, you should have got more than enough value from him by his deployability anyway. It's just kind of a little bonus, an extra bonus, the passive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the cards I'd like to discuss, because I think it's probably from when we first got our initial batch of revealed cards, was one of the mostly highly contested ones, and it's gotten changed. We're talking about the Ragaray. I believe he was originally spawned a Savage Bear, Wyvern, or a Griffin, and now it is what I'm seeing is Savage Bear, Wyvern, Ekimara, or a Drowner. So taking away the Griffin, but giving 2 units in its place, and again 2 monsters units. But is this maybe just? I'd really like to hear your thought process on Duragaray. What was the design intent behind this card?
Well, I mean, we're really trying to stick, in some cases, quite close to the lore, because it's great inspiration. Players obviously will enjoy it because it's familiar callbacks, and Duda Gary is kind of like a collector of rare creatures. You can see that from the artwork, and even in the artwork, he actually has an Ekimara in one of the cages. So it's just a very logical kind of jump to include those units. And we need to put units on him that don't have too many scenarios which make them unfair, and they're quite good utilities. I mean, Drowners, for example, they work really well with any kind of weather, so every faction can have good utility from them. Ekimara is obviously making units resilience, again, kind of good utility. The Wyvern with its Draconid synergy, there's a few neutral dragons that you can use, as well as, it should be quite obvious there'll be more dragons in the future as well in the game, so there's more, inbuilt synergy there. And Savage Bears are just always good, so, there's nothing wrong with a Savage Bear. And you can imagine it's very possible that Duda Gary's selection of creatures will grow as there are more applicable creatures that come into the game that would make sense for him to spawn. It's kind of like, the Wild Hunt Drakkar or Longship, I think, as it's also been called, was shown at Gamescom, and obviously that unit is now part of Eridan's ability as well, and because he summons any Wild Hunt unit. So it's really something, with units, when we add more to the game, some summoning abilities will kind of gain, spawning abilities will gain access to more things.
Now, one of the things with Duda Gary in particular that a lot of people have kind of voiced concern over is the fact that because he spawns some faction-specific cards, in fact, reaching to 2 different factions as a neutral card himself, some people are saying he takes away a little bit of that faction identity by giving everyone access to those guides. I personally think it's actually pretty cool giving that on abilities, basically having an option to be able to choose faction-specific cards like that. Are you using this as potentially like a kind of experiment, and then you might maybe add more effects like this in the future?
I'm not worried about the first part at all. I think people like to argue that this kills faction identity, blah blah blah. It's I don't put a lot of credence in a lot of those arguments, because, to be fair, we define what faction identity is, and it's up to us to kind of create that and make it. And our interpretation of faction identity might be different from an individual user's. So I really just don't put a lot of stock in that. And I think the general thing is that we want cards to be fun and people to enjoy, playing them. And this card really gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of different tools, and it really is fun because of that reason. There's always the possibility in some decks it can be too good, but it's kind of a balance. We want the card to be useful, because if we just put a bunch of creatures that didn't have any synergy with anything or couldn't really adapt across factions, then there would just be no point in it, and it would just not be played.
Yeah, I mean, one of the techniques employed by devs to kind of incentivize a higher amount of use on some of the cards that are honestly weaker is basically around this idea of mages. I mean, Hearthstone has like the discover mechanic, right? And these kind of mages, or these, I guess more aptly, choice cards, are basically like discover without RNG, right? I mean, how do you feel about these choice cards? Can we expect a lot more of them in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends what you mean by a lot more. I think that, that they'll come sporadically. Like there's 30 cards coming, and Duda Gary has a choice. And in terms of, the last amount of choice cards, I think there was the mages. There might be a couple other things I'm forgetting, but generally, it's something we are quite sparse with because they are really flexible. And, it really just depends. I think, in some cases we definitely will see more. I think special cards are a good place for that. Like, I'm personally really happy with Monster Nest as a card, and I expect we'll probably do some similar things to that for sure.
I actually have a Northern Realm specific question here.
Shocking, Ruben. That is shocking.
I know. So when playing Northern Realms, or trying to build a new deck about it, a unique one archetype that always have felt like, there should be something like this in Northern Realms, or there's like a few cards, a few puzzle pieces that aren't complete yet, and that's like the spam deck, the getting tons of units out there and buffing them all up, a big amount at once. But the only thing that we've seen so far right now is the poor flanking infantry, which is a very good addition because it's in one bronze card, it's 3 units on the board, which is something that would enable a specific, archetype like that. But is there anything else that, would support this strategy? Or are you thinking about this, and are you slowly like piecing these puzzles for an archetype like that together, but just a lot slower than like, adding just 2 cards, bam, bam, and this is a new archetype? Or is there any plans to add some more support for that archetype?
Do you mean in terms of like getting Blue Stripes commandos on the board? Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about like just a swarm deck in general? Yeah,
just a swarm deck in general.
I think that Northern Realms has a bunch of ways to do that right now with Temerian Infantry and Blue Stripes Commandos and the Kedwini Sergeants. So I think that, between them and Poor Infantry, you really have a lot of options. But Poor Infantry in general is just like a strong unit. It's 10 points straight off, and when you combine it with a potion, it's already really quite good and very easy value. I think Poor Infantry in many ways is kind of a card that is more meant for beginners, I would say, but it's definitely can be very valuable, and I think probably will be very valuable, just because it's a very good raw power card. And as you can see from the current live game, never underestimate just getting a lot of bodies on the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think Ruben's just trying to go for that at least 200 units on his side.
We have to aim for 300 now.
Oh. Well, I know we've been discussing what our favorite changes coming in with all these card changes have been, but I'm really curious, Rethaz, from your perspective, what is, and maybe it's something that we haven't seen announced yet, maybe you can't announce it, but from your perspective, what is the most exciting change or changes coming this patch?
What is the most exciting change coming this patch?
Yes.
Is that what you said? The gold card change for sure. I think it really opens up a huge amount of deck building possibilities and amounts of interactions. And I think that from what we've been testing, and we've had a PTR running for some time, and I think not everybody is super keen on it, but I think over time people will grow to really find it more enjoyable. It's I think one of the worst things in the game and most frustrating things in the game is if your opponent plays down 3 gold, you have a bunch of units in your hand that you've built your deck around dealing damage, or you've put weathers in your deck, or whatever the case is, and you just do nothing to your opponent, and you have no way to do anything. And at that point, in many cases, you kind of just lose the game because your units they can't do anything. So therefore, you just build a deck that interacts with yourself rather than interacting with your opponent, and that leads to some of the complaints people make about Solitaire, which I find a strange complaint because Solitaire is the most played video game in the world. So, it's not the worst comparison in some ways.
I actually have another question about positioning specific. So last big patch, you introduced like a lot more, the keyword for being able to position agile units on on a lot of cards, and you were kind of pushing that, almost all the cards. But are you specifically now leaving that on specific cards just to have it as a slight balance change to make them a little bit weaker? Because if so many units already, you're making very big changes like gold changes, and are you pushing that now, or the position change, or is it getting on every card now, or are we just using it as a balance tool to make them a little bit weaker, specific cards?
For the moment, I think it makes sense for some cards to keep it and some cards to not. I mean, if you have something, I'll take like a light longship as an example. A light longship having not being agile doesn't make any sense because it needs to be positioned very freely for it to work. And, you can say the same about a lot of things like the machines in Northern Realms and the various cards that work with them. If you are locked to certain rows, those strategies would just not be possible because, you wouldn't be able to do anything about them, and you'd be so massively disrupted by any movement that your opponent could do to you that it just wouldn't be fun. So for now we're kind of keeping it as is and playing it by ear with each unit, and for the future we'll have to see how it goes. As a team, the Gwent team, we're not afraid to make radical changes, and if it's something that needs to be done in the future for a multitude of reasons, then we will, and we'll just see how it goes.
So in the spirit of asking what your favorite overarching change was, I have a similar question. What's your favorite new card that you can talk about? Just in terms of design wise.
I think in some ways probably Wild Hunt Drakkar actually, and we'll probably experiment more with effects like that in the future, because right now it works in a way where the buff that it gives is very powerful because it gives +1 to all Wild Hunt units on the board. So, you obviously need to kind of play it semi-late in the round when you've got 6 or 7 units on the board. And the opponent can remove it, and that will again remove the buff. So it's kind of having temporary buffs on the board rather than permanent buffs on the board. And this is definitely something that we're going to be using more in the future. And it encourages that kind of counterplay. You want to take out this unit because it's buffing all of the enemies, so you don't just get the 7 points for the removal of the longship. I think it's 7 points. And if not, then if you do take it out, then you also take out its buffs as well. So it's not just having permanent buffs in the game; it's having both temporary and permanent buffs in the game. So I think it's definitely something we'll do more of, and it adds it. Hopefully will increase the interactivity of the game, things like that, because you want to deal with those cards that have a passive.
Yeah, I think it's great.
And you mentioned that this is it will buff all the cards that are all Wild Hunt units currently on the board once it's played, correct?
Did you say it buffs all the units on the board? Yeah.
Yes. So the units are on the board. You play the Drakkar, it buffs the units on the board.
Yes.
Okay. I guess my follow-up to that is, are you concerned that we're getting into a situation that we've seen, speaking of veterans from playing closed beta, where currently the only card that I can think of that really encourages the card advantage as a final big play is Gravehag. And this strikes me as a card that, again, will encourage people to try and fight for that card advantage so that they're able to play this big buffed unit on the board and not have any counterplay. And, it's something that you said you wanted to introduce is this idea of counterplay. How much emphasis do you give when designing new cards on either trying to reduce or eliminate the last card advantage?
I mean, when you look at it by numbers, the majority of cards, the last card advantage isn't really that important. Sure, the Gravehag, that's obviously true. But it's really a very small amount of cards, and those cards generally have a very large drawback. I mean, Gravehag is incredibly easy to remove, and obviously, there's various passive effects and weathers and different things that could possibly make that happen. So your opponent also needs to have in some cases you might know your opponent's game plan. If your opponent is playing a very heavy consume deck with lots of units, and therefore you kind of try and need to predict and then adapt your play style to that. In some cases that's not always possible, and therefore you might need to outpower them or try and beat them by some other means. I mean, card advantage is obviously important, but I think even at the top level at the moment, for example, a lot of the kind of those finishes are not necessarily always being played because the drawback is often kind of too heavy in some cases. So, we'll continue to see how that goes. I mean, as I've said before, we don't really like having that many like big last card finishes, and there really is just a handful of them in the game, and it'll probably stay that way. And I can't imagine we're going to introduce a huge amount of those. Something I don't think has been covered actually is that all of the archetypes, like big finishers, which we said before we're not happy with. So the Pirate Captain, the Spotter, the Vanguard, all have some changes to them as well. The Protector's still staying as it is for the moment because while some people don't like it, Spectator is a very unique archetype for the game. And with gold card changes, I think that how unfun that is to play against should be lessened significantly. So we'll see how that goes with Protectors. They might actually be a little bit weak right now, but we'd rather they stay that way than just pushing them too much. But those other cards have seen some changes to make them less kind of and again I talked about the critique of the mechanics. It's not really about the mechanics and how they work. It's more about the fact that you just play a very large body at the end for your last 3 cards and it feels kind of crappy to play against. That's the core of the issue, not the fact that it's buffed by being revealed or buffed by being discarded or whatever the case is. It's really just that you're playing and then it's like 15 15 15 and you're like, oh, I lost.
Yeah, makes sense. So Rethaz, I've observed in the past hour the amount of people spamming coin flip in chat has actually started to reach a critical mass. Do you think there's anything you can say regarding your guys' current plans to do anything there, or is that just a no-no?
I mean, I can say similar things to what I've said before. I mean, we've been working on a number of solutions, and I can't say if we're going to launch one in this patch or not at this time, but we will only launch something when we're ready, because it's really easy for people to give their solutions, and we do see it on a very regular basis on Reddit and our forums and various other places. And as harsh as it sounds, many of those solutions are just very misguided, and they in reality would lead to much larger problems in the game. A while ago, recently, I saw a post that talked about giving the starting player an extra card, like literally an extra card, but we all laugh. But the strange thing is, there are dozens of people that then reply to this and like, yeah, this is a great idea, and this would be a huge mistake. It would be far worse than the situation we have right now, in many ways. So. Until we have a solution that we're 100% happy with, and something we want to do, and we've talked about before, is having a large, a public test realm that people can kind of access, anyone can access. And I think that that's definitely something that we would be interested in looking at having players en masse take a look at. And any solution that is implemented will be a purely mathematical one. I don't think there's any way in Gwent where you can award a card or you can give a fake card that does X or something like this. It just all kind of revolves around the same problem. I think the problem, like the thing we've talked about before, kind of revolves around tempo and the ability to dry pass, and those are the kind of things and solutions that you could be likely to see. For example, the starting player gets X amount of points, maybe only on the first turn, maybe on the first and the second turn, if they lost conditionally. But then it becomes complicated, and this is something a lot of people don't think about when they propose solutions. You have to explain that to a new player that's learning the rules of the game. Imagine that you're playing, I don't know, let's say that you're playing chess, for example, and you say, oh yeah, by the way, before you play chess, you both have to play a game of rock, paper, scissors, and then flip a coin, and then you have to move, like, you get to move 2 pieces and he gets to move 1 piece, and then you play the game normally. It's like
you don't play chess that way?
No, exactly. I mean, I know you do, Dale, but that's a bit different. But I'm over exaggerating to purposely emphasize the point, obviously, but it really needs to be a very small, elegant solution that everybody just immediately gets, and the rule is there. And that's why, for example, let's say the starting player gets 5, let's call them phantom points or whatever the case is. It's I'm not saying we're doing that, but it's very likely that we will do something in that direction.
Oh.
There is it's not a leak. We talked about it before. Another solution that comes up a lot is putting
I
think I said this. No, I definitely talked about it on the last other one before. The other solution that often comes up is putting a token on the board, and the token on the board is something that's really very problematic in many ways, because you can consume it. Your opponent can damage it. You can buff it. You can do a whole bunch of various scenarios. There are some cards that are buffed by the amount of cards on the board, or buff X amount of cards on the board. So you're gaining some kind of intrinsic advantage from the game by the fact that you did go first now. So you're really just offsetting the problem to a different place. And that's why a lot of those solutions just in reality don't really work. And having some phantom points your opponent can't interact with and you can't interact with is really a very viable solution. It doesn't mess with Igni because it's total points, not on a specific row, and so on and so forth.
Now, I know you said we'll try and stay away from leaks, and I am curious as a former Squirtle player myself. We've seen the dwarf changes where now dwarves are very they were already probably one of the most synergistic archetypes, but we're seeing all these dwarf changes. What is the elf side of things looking like in general?
Elves in general have kind of, Elren works with elves, and one of the cards that actually the Vanguard, I think, actually does something specifically with elves now as well. That's kind of how it's reworked. Yeah, of course, as well. So there's some minor synergy, but we don't want elves to be a specific super, like, you only, obviously if you're running those cards, you kind of do put elves in your deck anyway, but I think dwarves very specifically functions around a racial synergy, and I don't think Squirtle, particularly at this point at least, needs a very specific, a bunch of cards that riff off the fact that cards are elves. A handful is totally fine, and it's something that there is, but making every card elf do this, elf do that is not something I think we need with the dwarf synergy existing in Squirtle. And I don't know, speaking of Squirtle, just kind of reminded me, I mostly because it's been gone from the game for so long, and I'm just like, man, you got to live in the moment, got to keep going. But we've seen, I think, since the last time we had you on the talk show, the removal of the faction passives. And I'm rather curious from the designer's perspective, has that generally been a positive trend, removing them? Has it made things easier? Has it made things more difficult? Has it been positive? Like, what's your guys' perception of this change now that we've had it out for a while with just, there's probably players out there that don't remember them at this point. I think I was on the show after we removed faction passives.
Really?
Surely I was. I can still answer it, but
yeah, you were.
I think
even more time now.
Generally, I think we're super happy with that change. It was creating a lot of extra complications and problems with balance, and it's also just barrier to entry. Some players will say, "Oh, you're dumbing down the game," and I really hate that terminology and phrase. It doesn't really apply in many cases, and Gwent is an exceptionally complicated game, and nothing is ever going to change that. It's never going to not be. And eliminating some rules that create, in many cases, unnecessary hurdles is generally a good thing, at least in our opinion. So I think we were worried there would be a lot of backlash about removing faction passives, and there really wasn't. And I can always be wrong, and the team can always be wrong, but I think that the gold change will go the same way. So there's some people that obviously won't be happy with that, but I'd suggest play it and see how it feels. And really, it's gold cards. are still better than silver cards budget-wise. Silver cards are still better than bronze cards budget-wise. There's always kind of exceptions, and you can argue that this bronze might be better than this silver in this situation, so on and so forth. But it's kind of just semantics at that point. But we'll have to see how it goes. I think, I hope it will work out that way, and believe it will from the work and the testing that everybody at CD Projekt Red has been doing. But so we'll have to see.
Well, I think I am all about questioned out. Swim, Ruben, anything you guys have? Well, we can always circle back, but I want to go ahead and briefly touch on. So for anyone, more Gwentlemen side of things, we did just finish up the casting of the Gwentlemen's Open for August this past week. You can view the VOD on our YouTube over at youtube.com/Team Gwentlemen. In case you missed that, we will have one for September, date to be determined, but I mean, we're trying to keep it monthly. In addition, we have the Gwentlemen's Invitational still ongoing. We are going into, I think, week 5. Am I off a week on that one? Swim, Ruben?
Right now we're in week 4, and next
we're in week 4. Okay, I was a little ahead of myself, but the Gwentlemen's Invitational also VODs up on our YouTube, and we're doing the cast of those every Tuesday. And then just as a quick reminder to any donations that we receive for the Gwentlemen's account right now, all of those are going 100% to the prize pool for the Gwentlemen's Invitational. We're already up over $900 for that prize pool, so keeping it really competitive and really interesting for all the players, and like it's just super cool seeing the community response on that. So I just wanted to quickly get into that and remind everybody that we are doing the next cast up on Tuesday. But before we go ahead and turn this over to viewer questions, Rethaz, I know I've asked you this before, probably a lot, but slightly different this time. Of the new batch of cards, what's your favorite premium of them?
I think that I think I might say I think we showed it before.
Yeah, no, you showed it, dude. It's
I've seen it already. Yeah.
Go for it.
I'm pretty sure.
The Cyclops.
Yeah, no, you showed that. No,
Yeah,
don't worry. Yeah,
I think the Cyclops is just great. It's really awesome, and it was made by some of our very very talented artists, and it's really actually it's one of my favorite cards for a long time, not just from this recent batch. It's pretty cool.
and one last thing regarding the TGI. Now, Rethaz, I believe you were saying to me at a certain point earlier that you may have a special announcement regarding it.
Yeah. So obviously, we don't actually have a team of from kind of my area. We have obviously Vishra has his team from the PR department and community department, and so it kind of just as an exhibition match, we'll have the winners of the Gwentlemen tournament will be able to play against myself and 2 of the other designers on the team. And for those of you that know my play, I've been in the top 100 multiple times in the history of the game, and the guys that I was playing with have been in the top 100 and sometimes the top 10 multiple times. Our player, some of our developers don't really advertise themselves, but we often get critique, and like every game, I think that players don't the developers don't play the game, and we do play this game, and I know you guys know that anyway, but I think it's important for some of the people that aren't so familiar with us that they really know that we do play the game and are very invested in it.
Awesome. And take that as a donation, just raising the stakes even higher and higher for the Gwentlemen. Like, it is very exciting. But no, with that, I mean, obviously, Swim, Ruben, if you got anything to throw in, but I do want to go ahead and open this up to viewer questions. So if you have...
Let's open it up to viewer questions. Anybody, if you want to tag Gwentlemen in chat, if Rethaz, you're free to call out anything that you'd like to answer that you see, and we'll take it from there.
Anybody have a first question?
Just waiting for those to pour in real quick.
Because, I mean, a lot of people in the chat are asking about roping, and if you rope out, it should discard a card because it has some functions with discard Skellige, of course.
It's the discarding. I think I've actually talked about it before, but for those that aren't familiar, I can repeat it. It's I've mentioned the new tech changes we're working on a number of times. One of the things that you will be able to do is put a card in the graveyard directly from your hand, so that you won't have this situation where you have to wait to time out for the card to disappear. It's just literally something we cannot do right now, and when these tech changes come in, we will be able to.
So you'll be able to play the discard archetype in every faction.
I mean, I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, to be honest, but sure, yeah. You could discard every single card each turn and lose the game. That would be great.
All right. Well, I'm picking this one because it's sticking with the Sky itself. But question specifically for Rethaz, is there some love for mulligan in next patch?
Yes. So something that we've been working on in Mulligan, and again, this is kind of a tech change that we have actually made. The way that Mulligan worked was hard-coded, and some players might know what that means and some players don't. So I'll give a little explanation. It basically means that it's not open for design. It's very closed and you can't really do anything about it. And some of our programmers have been working very hard on opening up some kind of areas for us to do some mechanic changes with. And in this case, it's actually going into this patch. So some Mulligan things will kind of be changed so that they can now, the triggers and the various interactions can actually work on coming to the hand and going from the hand, so that Mulligan things wouldn't only work with Mulligan, they would actually work with the drawing of cards in some cases as well. So therefore you can put synergy with Avala and various other things as well. On top of that, like some of the Mulligan cards that we weren't super happy with, and I mentioned Vanguards earlier as an example, have kind of been upgraded and changed, and so we'll have to see what players think of it. I think Mulligan, personally, and I've always thought this is a very high skill-capped way to play the game. I think the same can be said for Nilfgaard in general, and this is definitely why we see some players not trending towards Nilfgaard and Squirtel. They, at least in my opinion, have always been the most difficult and challenging decks to play in the game. So we'll have to see how it works out, but we hope people will like it.
Oh, I thought you had something. So.
Oh no! I've got all kinds of things. Here we go. Here's one. Are you have any plans on making card interactions more consistent? I.e., what triggers first? For example, in Hearthstone, it goes by order of cards played.
I actually mentioned that earlier in the show, so the answer is yes. And it's part of this new this big kind of tech rework we've been working on for some time. I mean, it shouldn't be underestimated how big of a technical undertaking this has been. The game, in many ways, was very simple, and it's grown in scope and scale a lot. And it's something that's really, been a big challenge for people. And the general idea is that there's, a very specific order to the way things trigger, and it should make a lot of interactions just much more consistent. That's the idea, and that's the plan, and hopefully it'll work out in that way. Am I a Dagon player? I don't know. I've played many different decks, so that was just a random.
He is a monsters man. Yeah.
It depends. Generally, I actually play in each patch, and I've told you guys this before, and I generally play what's considered the weakest in most patches.
Rethaz, you made monsters. You're the monsters man.
That's true, but I still do play on live generally what's considered to be the weakest on purpose, to see how, to see why people think it's weak.
Here's another one. How will we differ between temporary and permanent buffs? So you mentioned that like the new the Wild Hunt Drakkar will have a buff when it goes onto the field, and then if it's removed, that buff is removed. Will that be just a plus to bonus whenever it's out, and then minus when it, like damage when it's gone, or is it actually more of a tech? I guess, how does that function?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Dale?
Sure. So how will we tell the difference between the temporary and the permanent buffs?
You won't, and you don't need to, in all honesty. It's really, you know, when you're playing the game, you in reality don't need to keep track of that. You know that the Wild Hunt Drakkar is responsible for buffing the units. That's its ability. And as a player, you need to learn that. You know, having different color buffs all over the place just isn't a good solution, and it won't, it won't work in reality, and it would just be more confusing.
And this next one, lots of caps on. I don't know if I should shout out event or not, but can we get maybe some clarification? I'm not sure if this is something you can answer or not, but the Mahakam Ale Festival, I believe was mentioned. Do you have any additional information about what that is, or is that something we just need to sit and wait on?
I'm not sure what's been said, but generally it's it's mainly focused on kind of some cool single player custom battles, and obviously, you know, we like to have cool rewards for things, so players can expect some cool custom rewards for things from any holiday events. And I think, you know, at Gamescom they talked a little bit about the fact that we plan to have quite regular holiday events. That doesn't mean there'll be something every month, but we really, you know, out of a calendar year, we would like to try and provide at least, you know, somewhere between 6 and 8 holiday events a year. So we have them planned, and you know, there's some really unique and interesting ideas that the guys are working on for them, and hopefully players will enjoy them.
I have a question. Skellige Storm seems a little bit on the strong side now that gold cards cannot block it anymore. Is there going to be any small, insignificant changes coming to that card?
Does it?
I mean, you had a way to counter it, so it was like, I mean, Skellige Storm felt like a really strong card, but because you could counter it a little bit, it felt okay. But right now that it's uncounterable, it seems quite strong, very strong even.
We've reduced the damage slightly, but only very slightly. I mean, in reality, Skellige Storm works out to be, now it will work out to be 4 damage a turn. Bronze Weather is 2 damage a turn. It's not really something that I mean, sure, you can play it from the hand, but I don't think you're going to be particularly keen to play that from the hand, especially when weathers can be cleared, and you know, the opponent can obviously play many of their units on other rows. And if you're playing it late game, then you're not really going to get that many turns of value out of it either. So I think Skellige Storm will be super fine. It will probably see quite a lot of play, and I think that's okay. It just, you know, I genuinely don't imagine that it's going to be in every deck, but you know, we'll have to see, like always.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's one. Are there any plans to change cards like Elias, which have no synergy with the faction they're in?
Elias is changed in this update.
Crazy.
I keep getting plenty of variations on this one, but I guess the general question seems to be, console players really want to play with their friends. Do we have any time on when that is a possibility?
I actually can't confirm if that's in this update or not, unfortunately. We'll have to see how that goes, but if not, then it's something that is actively being worked on. So you know, we'll just have to see. But we don't. You know, there's some. I see some threads and various things written that, you know, console players feel like second-class citizens, and that's really not how we envisage it as a company. You know, all of our players are very important to us, you know, in equal measure. It's just, there really are a lot more hurdles because we don't own the distribution platform. I mean, GOG is owned by the CD Projekt Group. So it's obviously very easy, and there's very few hurdles for us to kind of release the game how and as we want. And when you're making games on console, there's really a lot of certification rules and limitations that you have to go through. And it's really just not very straightforward. It's very, very complicated. And, you know, we know that these features is something people want, and we have it in the works, and hopefully it'll make it into this patch, but I can't guarantee that that will happen.
Oop. Suddenly silence.
Yeah, that's
that's
our longest one yet.
Trying to find the chat moves fast, even with the slow-mo. And I know people were complaining about slow-mo, but there's a reason we
chat's going by so fast. You know, nobody will. Whatever.
Well, I'm paraphrasing, so if somebody who had this can help me out with asking the question again, because I did lose it in the chat. I apologize. But you mentioned that cards like the I think it was Temerian Infantrymen were more designed as new player cards, where as a newer player you'd find you'd see the value of the card and you'd play it, and it really is obvious to a newer player that this is a card that is easy for them to understand and play and get into. Is there a conscious decision to design cards not for new players and more for the experienced players?
It depends. I think different cards have different aims. If you look at, I think the Cyclops, for example, I think the Cyclops is an exceptionally difficult unit to play well, and the average player is going to have a hard time getting good value out of it. Advanced players are going to really find very inventive and useful ways to play that card that get great value. So it really just seems, different cards have different aims, and I think that's really very fair, and to be honest, really quite normal.
Here's one. Will they implement custom card skins or game boards?
We said before this is something that we would like to do, but that is really a much longer term goal, and not something that people should be expecting to see anytime soon.
I actually have a question. You mentioned that the overall strength of a bronze card would be raised. What was the specific reason behind this?
It's honestly really complicated, because in some cases players might argue that that's not the case. It really depends, because some bronze cards are worth more than others depending on the situation and the synergies. The general idea is that we want bronze cards to feel both powerful or very useful. It really depends on their ability. Something like, say, for example, the Kidwinny Siege Master is meant to feel useful rather than powerful, because it's, the unit that you're replaying is meant to feel powerful. So the general idea is to make bronzes feel across the board much more useful, and to hopefully encourage people to try out different decks in different ways. And also, the higher the general power of each unit gets in the game, the more flexibility it gives us with abilities. Because, one of the big problems we had with Weather is that, dealing 1 damage to everything with Frost sounds, it does sound weak to many players on paper, but then in reality, when you play that, it's actually really great, because it's like 5 or 6 points per turn. So, raising the general cap of points of units in the game gives us a lot more flexibility in the amount of damage and buffing and various other things we can do, because one of the problems that we have in the game right now is that people find abilities that do 1 per turn, or they buff by 1, or whatever the case may be. They don't find them that interesting, and they don't find them that appealing, because they feel that they are weak and not interesting. As soon as you push that to 2, those units suddenly start to spiral out of control in a way that is very detrimental for the game. And I can use the Ancient Foglet as an example of that. We've buffed him to, I think, 8 in this patch, because he's just not seeing play. And in reality, those units can get very easily above the average bronze value of a card. But if we buffed them to be buffing by 2, they would snowball out of control incredibly quickly. So it's something that we're just keeping an eye on, and if we need to push general values higher in the game to achieve more fun and better gameplay, then we will. It's just something we have to see how it goes.
I have one here. Any plans for more ambush cards, or do you want to move away from it as a mechanic? We've obviously seen a steep decline in the amount of ambush cards in the game going into open beta.
I think ambush cards is something that our player base very fervently told us that they weren't super keen on. So we're quite limited about, we're quite reserved about putting more of them in the game. I mean, that I am absolutely certain there will be more ambush cards in the game, but don't expect there to be 10 or 20 ambushes in the cards in the game anytime soon.
There, that is again.
Right. It's hard. It's a lot of stuff to we could ask, but do we? Can we ask if Eskel's deploy ability will be limited to bronze and silver units only?
Sorry, could you repeat that? Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you sometimes.
No problem. Is Eskel's deploy ability? I need to check settings real quick. Eskel's deploy ability, which I believe we know is so he's a 6 strength now, and on deploy, destroy a unit that has been, as long as it has not been buffed. Mm-hmm. Is that limited to only bronzes and silvers, or is he going to be sniping some golds too?
He can destroy anything at the moment. Eskel is one of the cards that I think he's actually the only card we're a bit worried about at the moment. So we're still looking at him, and we're generally pretty happy with the rest of how the game is looking. And we'll keep an eye on him if if we do introduce him in this manner and he turns out to be too good. It's something that we'll take a look at. It really sounds like it's insane on paper. But in many cases, you can play him in a game and you'll find that you won't get the kind of value that you think that you will on paper. There are specific cards that are very weak to him, and this is the example of Unseen Elder and some other things as well. So we'll have to see how his actual live form turns out. We'll see how it goes.
All right, here's another one. So I know it was talked about before. Is I think one of the goals going for public beta, but I believe we don't have it yet, so I can only assume. But just some, I guess, confirmation. Is the Reconnect feature still being actively worked on?
Yes, it's it's kind of related to the tech rework that I talked about for various really complicated reasons that I can't get into, but it's something that we know is important to us, but something players should really think about when they think about reconnecting is that, if the problem, sure, so there are some people that suffer from this, and genuinely the problem is blown out of proportion. When you see a post on Reddit about it, sure, it is happening to that player, and there's no denying that, there's no conspiracy, but by and large, the percentage of games that are dropped is insignificant. And obviously that's not to say the problem for that player isn't insignificant. It really sucks for them, and we want to try and make that better. But on the scale of things, it is insignificant, and we are working on it. But it's more, there are some other underlying factors that relate to that, to do with the country that specific people live in, and some of those things are kind of out of our control as well. But even if you have a reconnect feature, if the problem in some cases does lie on the user's end, then basically if you time out for 30 seconds or whatever the case can be and you don't get back into the game, you've probably lost the game anyway because you just lost a card. So, and there's nothing that we can really do about that. People will say, oh, you should pause the game when I disconnect, but then players will just abuse that to grief their opponent, and there's no real way around. People would actually do that? They would do that, Swim.
Yeah, I know.
So it's really, the Reconnect feature is something that is actively and has actively been worked on, and it's, the general thing is more of a grace period of allowing disconnections in a better way. That already does exist, and that's why the majority of players don't actually have this issue. But for those that do, it's not to, and sometimes people twist my words to try and make it seem like I'm saying these people don't matter or this issue doesn't matter, and that's categorically not the case. And anybody that's seen my track record of interaction with the community knows that that's not true. I worry very much personally about these things, and so do the people working on those features. It's why would we want players to not be happy with the game? It's logically doesn't make any sense.
Here's one. Will Nilfgaard Golems change at all? IMO, it's a poorly designed card that makes Kelvit a turn 1 play 90% of the time.
Oh, Golem? Sorry, was that about?
Yeah, Imperial Golems.
To say Golem is a poorly designed card, I think is factually incorrect. It's just opinion, and opinion can't be factually correct. Golems served the specific purpose of giving Nilfgaard more thinning, and they definitely achieved that. I think part of the fact is that the community very much latched onto that as being auto-include. There was, people saying they would include them as disloyals or zeros, and that's just, it's just not true. But they are being changed in this patch, and we do listen to our community in general, and it's something, if players really don't like something, it might take us some time to react, but we are changing them. And
5 strength now, right?
No, they're actually 99 strength with Gwen, and they're immune.
See, I appreciate you listening to my feedback.
And they also spawn 3 more golems on every row.
Now, is that 3 on each row, or?
It's 7 on each row, Swim. 7.
There's a thin line here,
All right. Well, a couple of questions specifically. I know people have been. I mean, we try to discuss as much as we can, but the gold card changes have a lot of people questioning how a lot of things are going to be working. So, just a couple of quick fire ones at you. Are we able to decoy a gold card?
No, decoy. I mean, is the same card as it is now. Decoy doesn't allow you to bring gold cards back to the hand and replay them. Neither does Amir.
And I had another. Oh crap! Chat moving. There's another gold card question. Oh, any possible changes to villain Tretmirth? Since one of the big things with his effect was that he was gold, and so it was a lot harder to stop that effect from going off. But now that golds are able to be targeted, is there any plans to adjust how villain Tretmirth's working?
I honestly can't remember his value on live at the moment because I'm so in.
He's currently at 8
on the PTR. Oh yeah, he's still 8, but he has some armor and he cannot destroy himself.
Will you be able to lock gold cards with cards like Cleaver?
Yes, you will. I think that the amount of locks in the game is honestly not very high unless you're Nilfgaard, and then you have a bit more of an advantage. But, I mean, having a specific faction advantage isn't necessarily a bad thing. You always have the ability to unlock them. You can run Renew in your deck to resurrect them if you want to use them again later in the deck. And there's various, other ways around that. And I think it's generally fine. There's really only a handful of golds that are, and this is an example that to me is very frustrating. I read these threads and people say things and they're like, oh, so many gold cards need to be changed. And what they mean by so many is 4. And it's really bizarre to read.
Deck, though.
I've heard multiple people say most gold cards.
Yeah, and it's an absolute fallacy. It's really bizarre, It's so that's actually exceptionally frustrating to look at and to deal with because the reality is that we are talking about a very small fraction of the cards, and we've in the cases we believe steps need to be taken to do something about that. We have taken them, and we don't want to do that too drastically. Because then those cards would be far too good. I mean, Succubus is still going to remain a really high risk play, and that's her intention. We want her to be a very risky play because the payoff for her is huge. So, Succubus does see play, not in every deck, but we'll have to see how she plays out. I can't imagine us ever making Succubus incredibly difficult to remove. She's played Loyal now, by the way. But if she was incredibly difficult to remove, then players would just be frustrated on the opposite end. I see a bunch of times in chat people saying like things that just don't make sense, and I find stuff like that really, really weird because they're twisting my words, which just all things like that do is push developers not to interact with the community. And I think that's a really, really odd way to go about interacting with developers. And, you can see from other Reddits and other games that the majority of developers don't interact with their communities because they just get abused all the time. So I think for those of you doing that, maybe you should think about that. It's just some food for thought.
Yeah.
Okay, well, one more gold change rework question, I suppose. While we're still on the subject, assassination possibly getting changed or not?
Assassination, yeah, it's definitely see some changes in this patch.
Oh. Here's one that I found. Are there any plans to rename some of the monsters' silver units to be their unique name forms?
Yeah, that's going live in this patch as well. I mean, some people that play in other languages are already aware that that's the case. Like, I think in every other language other than English, actually, the monster cards actually have their unique names, and they'll get their unique names in this patch.
Cool.
If anybody has any questions, remember, it's just throw an @Gwentlemen at us, and we'll go ahead and look through and check out any questions that you guys have for us or for Rethaz. So, speaking of, this one's locks in general, but I think he actually just means de-shackles. Is that still going to demote a gold card to silver? Is that idea of demoting a gold card still prevalent in a world where we're able to just interact with gold cards directly?
I think it's something that's still viable, and there are, for example, I know many people are demoting Avalar to replay him at the moment. So it's something that I think has validity, and we want that to stay in the game. That's why Dimeritium Shackles got a bit of an upgrade to give it the damage as well, because it makes it a bit more flexible. I mean, locking is still can be a very powerful tool. So I think it still has a place. It won't be played, I think, from the hand very often. It's more likely to see synergy as a card that's been tutored by some various cards that can pull alchemy cards out of the deck. So we'll have to see how it ends up being used, but I don't think it'll be a dead card. I think it will just be played, not too often.
On the subject of changing gold cards, how will the refund system work with it? Is it only going to be the cards who will be drastically changed because of the gold change, or is it going to be? I don't think it will be all the gold cards, but it's still a very big mechanical change. How will you approach that?
What in terms of? Sorry, was that just about the values in general of gold cards?
No. The refund. If you want to craft a card and all that.
To be honest, I think that in general, it really depends on whether the card is nerfed or buffed in terms of like its mechanics and its abilities. A general rule change like this, I think, is something that we wouldn't be super keen to do anything about, because the game is still be the same and on an even keel for everybody. I mean, there are very specific examples where certain cards may want to be refunded, and if that's something that we'll look at and adapt to accordingly. It's I think generally as a game, Gwent's been quite fair to people, and I think that's just something we intend to continue. And any card that we think is significantly less powerful for whatever means may be, or because its ability was changed or whatever the case, is something that will be offered for a refund.
Mm-hmm.
If something is significantly better, I mean, we're not going to offer refunds for it because it's better.
Yep.
Well, we've seen Eskel and Vesemir. Any words on Lambert for finishing off that gold trio?
Sadly, no leaks.
No more leaks.
I don't think anything I said was a leak, to be honest. It's almost all talked about. I even talked about the Rot Fiend before, so.
Any news on Spectator mode?
Not at this time. Obviously it's something that we do want to do, but it's more of a, it's actually related to this tech rework as well. Like, it's hard to kind of explain, but the way that the cards and the data will be transferred and worked is a lot more easily trackable and replicatable, and that kind of leads into the Spectator mode.
Okay. Cool.
Are there any plans for adjusting the number of silver and gold cards allowed in the deck, or is that still set at 6 and 4?
At this time, we don't have any plans to do that. We sometimes see this suggestion come up to allow you to switch golds and silver cards, and the reality is that is a really difficult UI element to overcome, and again makes for more confusing deck building rules when Gwent already is quite a complicated game. So I'm not sure if that's something that we will introduce. We might do, and it's been an internal suggestion for a very long time. It's just really not as straightforward as it seems. The game is very much built around the fact that you have these limits, and kind of changing that does cause some complications in many different UI screens.
Is there a public bug tracker so I can see if I should report one or not?
I think that on the Gwent Reddit there's a bug mega thread, as far as I'm aware, but I don't think there's anything public provided by CD Projekt Red. I mean, if you do encounter a bug and you want to report it, you can go to our support website and use the report a bug feature there.
I know, so many of these questions, just like, is so-and-so getting changed? Is this getting changed? Is this getting changed? And I'm just like, I can ask them all if you'd like, but I think a lot of this is just like, we're so close. We're so close, guys. We'll see all the changes soon. Yeah, I'm not. Swim, Ruben, any of your questions you're seeing that catch your eye?
They're all the same ones that people have been spamming every 60 seconds for the past 15 minutes.
Yep. It's just going to be...
There was a question that was asked a minute ago about hotfixes and why we don't release them more often. And the reality is that like there is no good time to do that because some players will like it and some players won't. So, you know, sometimes we decide that we're not going to do an update because we're focusing on making the next update instead. And that's kind of what we've been doing here. I mean, the reality is when we look at the statistics that we have for the game, we've actually seen really healthy distribution across the majority of the game. I mean, at the top end of the game, there's a really unhealthy distribution of decks, and I genuinely am not sure that that's something that is fixable in any way. And it doesn't. People can say that the game is unbalanced, that there's problems with various things, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think if the game had, you know, almost everything with exactly the same statistics and something was slightly better at the top end of the game, that thing would obviously be played more. So it's something that's not really, I think, in any realistic sense, unless there are, you know, very prolific players that are responsible for different factions that kind of push those factions to a popularity. I'm not sure at the very top end of the game. That's actually not true because at the very top end of the game, there is actually a lot of variety. It's kind of like slightly below the very top end of the game, but above the majority of players that there is a lack of variety.
Well, you're forcing variety with the new ladder, right? Because there will be specific leader kind of points, you know, that you will have to obtain, and you know, with the new, the whole new ladder system. So you will be forced to play every faction.
That's true, but I mean, in that case, it's more. You know, there might be one deck per faction that everybody plays, and you know, I hope that people will try and experiment more and find more things that are both fun and powerful to play. But you know, we'll have to see how that works out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's one. Will there be a developer stream discussing changes before the patch, and will it be announced tomorrow?
I believe that there will be. I mean, I'm pretty sure the guys, you know, every time we do an update, they want to do a developer stream. And so I can't imagine that would be any different this time. I have no idea if that will be announced tomorrow or another day. I'm not sure.
I think it just got announced today.
No, as in, I mean, date though. I mean, there's no, you know, I think for every patch that we've done, including hotfixes, we've done a dev stream. So I think that will be the case.
Will weather immunity as an ability ever come back, or immunity as like the current gold cards? Like, is that, I guess we'll just keep it with weather immunity. Is that an ability that you foresee ever coming back on any cards?
I genuinely don't think so. I mean, I would never say never, but weather immunity is again kind of something that leads to interactive plays, and you know, then you have mirror matches where both players just can't affect each other, and we did have that situation before. So I'm not sure. I think if we were to ever reintroduce any weather immunity, it would probably be something that would reduce damage by a specific amount or something along those lines. But even then, that becomes a bit difficult because, you know, we can't really play with you know, fractions. It becomes very problematic, and we have some cards at the moment that you know, halve things, and then we have to explain whether they round up or round down, and in various situations, because of the way mechanics work, they might work in a way players don't intend, so it makes the tooltips incredibly wordy. Tooltips in general is something that when we do our tech rework, we'll kind of get a revamp to be a bit shorter. Some of them are growing too long again, and we need to bring that in a bit.
All right. Well, I think that's about time.
Oh, no, I've got one more.
Swim's got one.
There's one more. Why the coin do not flap first before the mulligan?
I guess that's about the fact that you can see the coin before the mulligan.
Yeah.
I know that I actually was looking. I don't know if anyone's familiar, but we use some bug tracking software called Jira. It's very common. It's kind of the industry standard for bug tracking, at least from the companies I've worked at. And I was looking at a task related to that specifically over the last couple of days. So I'm not sure if that's going to go into this patch, but it's something that actually is in the works to be fixed.
All right. Seen any other ones, Swimmer Ruben?
No, that was the last good one I had.
That was a good one to end it on.
Yeah, no, I think so too.
All right, well, I believe that's all the time that we're going to have for this week's talk show. Rethaz, thank you very much for agreeing again to be on the talk show with us. And I mean, you mentioned it before, but it can't be understated that this is probably the only game development company, period, that I've ever dealt with personally that has come out into the community to the extent that CD Projekt Red has. So deeply appreciated from me the amount of effort that goes into putting yourself out there. So definitely appreciate it. Thank you very much for agreeing to be on the talk show, and I definitely hope to have you on again in the future at some point, knock on wood. But any closing statements, any shout outs that you would like to give?
Is directed to me, or are we going in
directed to you, Rethaz?
Yeah, I just want to, as always, give a shout out to the team. I know that they've worked super hard on this update, and we all hope it will go really well. I think for players, really, Gwent as a game is very much treading new ground. It might sound silly, but it's really, as a card game, it's very different to our competitors and to other games out there. And we need the game to evolve and to be, over time, hopefully become more fun, more engaging, and more rewarding for players as well. And there's a lot of features that we have in the works. The single players is kind of just the start of that. We have new game modes we want to do and other features beyond that as well. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes, and hopefully players stick with us and enjoy the game and continue to be interested and invested in the game.
Ruben, any closing shout-out statements?
Crocodile Dundee, but that's about it.
That's not a knife. That's a knife. Yes.
Huh?
It's the quote from Crocodile Dundee. You're too young, Swim.
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
you just got quoted. Isn't Ruben
you
younger?
you should know all the Crocodile Dundee quotes, Swim.
Why?
You of all people.
Why? Wait, why me?
Because you're a crocodile.
Oh, I get it. Very good, Ruben. Very good. Well done.
That wasn't too difficult, was it?
Swim, any closing statements or shout-outs?
I'd like to give a shout out to chat. They're always I like some of the the memes they do. They make me smile.
All right, well, as always, shout out to the Gwent subreddit over at gwent.reddit.com. From the subreddit, you can find the links to the official Gwent Discord, where you can chat with your fellow players in real time, just in case Reddit's a little bit too slow for you, but it's good having the varieties there. Speaking of being able to chat with your fellow players, if you want to go someplace where you are, I think Paul recommended any serious game sessions go because the developers are reading the forums. It's over at the official Gwent forums, so definitely check those out as well. Also, shout out to the Ask Gwent Discord. Ask a question, get an answer. Pretty self-explanatory. They're actually coming out with a podcast. I think it's either in the works or the first episode's out now. I'm not 100% on that one. But check out them as well, because they're seriously a really great community. They're helping out the new players get into Gwent. And it's an ask a question, get an answer. It's really easy for them. That's about all the shout outs I have, I think. I know I'm probably missing several, but thank you all very much, everybody who tuned in, and we will be back on this channel on Tuesday for the cast of the Gwentlemen's Invitational Week 3. So I do hope to see you all again then. Until the next time, take care, everybody.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you, Rethaz.
Nice one, Swim.
Are we live still? No, we're not.
I think